My name is Harold Gaines. I'm 74, a retired Marine Corps Master Sergeant, and I've seen combat in places most folks can't even pronounce. I walk with a limp these days and carry myself slow, but my memory's still sharp. I was just out for my usual Sunday stroll in Roosevelt Park, minding my own business with a thermos of coffee and my favorite ball cap pulled low against the sun. I always wear that cap, it's from my last deployment. A younger man might not understand, but when you've served your country and come home whole, that cap becomes something more than cloth. It's a shield. It's your history. I'd just taken a seat on the same old wooden bench near the Veterans Monument when I noticed a patrol car slow roll past the tree line. Then another one. And another. I thought maybe something had happened nearby. But they weren't looking around, they were looking right at me. Two officers stepped out, hands on their hips like they were sizing up a threat. One of them, the taller one with the buzz cut and mirrored glasses, tapped the side of his belt and unhooked the leash on his K9, a big German shepherd that looked like it could take down a bear. "Sir, stand up and put your hands where I can see them," the officer barked. I was confused. I hadn't done a damn thing. Mind telling me what this is about? I asked, standing up slowly with one hand still gripping my cane. "Got a report of a suspicious individual matching your description," the shorter one said. I looked around. Suspicious? I'd been sitting on that same bench every week for years. That's when the taller cop gave a signal. The leash dropped. The dog surged forward, and what happened next, no one saw coming. The dog charged across the grass with such force the leash snapped from the officer's hand like a slingshot. People nearby froze, some screamed, others reached for their phones. I braced myself, planting my cane into the ground and preparing for pain. But the German shepherd didn't lunge. It stopped. Right in front of me. Ears up. Head tilted. Eyes locked on mine like it was trying to remember something. Then, without warning, the dog sat down. The taller officer shouted again, "Attack." Nothing. The K9 didn't move. Instead, it inched forward, slowly, gently, and sniffed my boots. Then it did something that turned the entire scene upside down, it lowered its head and licked my hand. Gasps rang out from the nearby playground. A jogger actually dropped her phone. The shorter officer looked stunned. What the hell? The taller one stepped forward angrily, trying to grab the dog by the collar. But the dog growled, a deep, chesty warning. He backed off. "Looks like your partner's got better judgment than you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The crowd was growing now. People were filming. Whispers buzzed through the park like wind through leaves. Then, from behind the patrol cars, a new voice cut through the tension, "Stand down. All of you." Everyone turned. And when I saw who it was, I nearly dropped my thermos. Walking briskly through the park gate came a woman in full military dress uniform, Army. Oak leaf clusters on her shoulders. Chest full of ribbons. Colonel. Her presence alone made the two officers straighten like they'd been yanked by puppet strings. "Colonel Westbrook?" I said, blinking. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, last time was at a memorial for one of our own. She gave me a quick nod. "Sergeant Gaines. You all right, sir?" "I'm fine, ma'am. The dog seems to have more discipline than the men." She turned toward the officers. Her expression hardened like stone. "Who gave the order to release a K9 on a decorated veteran sitting on a bench?" Neither cop spoke. The colonel stepped in closer, voice cutting like a knife. "Do you know who this man is?" "Master Sergeant Harold Gaines. 3 combat tours. Bronze Star. Saved 6 men under fire in Kandahar. And you sick a dog on him?" The taller officer, visibly sweating now, tried to justify himself. "Ma'am, we received a report from whom?" she snapped. "And even if you did, your first response is to deploy a K-9 without assessing the situation. This isn't a war zone. This is a public park. The dog, meanwhile, was now lying calmly at my feet, like it had decided who the real threat was. I looked around. More people had gathered. Some were clapping. A few had tears in their eyes. Colonel Westbrook turned back to me. "Harold, would you like to press charges for unlawful threat and use of force?" I didn't answer right away. I was still processing. But then I saw a young boy clutching his mother's hand, staring up at me with wide, confused eyes. And I made my decision. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. That little boy's eyes held the same look I'd seen too many times overseas, the look of someone trying to make sense of fear. "I'm not pressing charges," I said finally. The crowd murmured. Even the colonel looked surprised. "But," I added, turning to the officers, "I am filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. And I expect a written apology from both of you. Not to me, to every veteran who's ever been treated like a threat instead of a citizen." The taller officer swallowed hard. The shorter one lowered his gaze. Colonel Westbrook gave a short nod. "That's your right. And I'll make sure the department hears about this from higher up." Then she turned to the K-9, still calmly lying at my feet, and gave a soft whistle. "Kaiser. Heel." The dog stood, looked at me one last time, and then trotted obediently to her side. The crowd began to disperse, but not before a few people came up to shake my hand. A woman placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Thank you. For everything." I nodded, humbled but still rattled. As the patrol cars rolled away, one thing stuck in my mind: how the dog, trained to attack, had refused. It hadn't seen a target. It had seen a brother. And somehow, in that moment, it remembered what some people forget: respect isn't earned by a badge. It's earned by a life lived with honor. Later that evening, I sat on my porch, the sunset bleeding orange across the rooftops. My cane rested against the rail, and I had the old thermos beside me, still half full. I wasn't angry anymore. I was thoughtful. Reflective. When you've lived long enough, you learn the difference between a moment and a movement. That Sunday in the park was a moment, one I hoped might spark something bigger. The next morning, a clip from the park had gone viral. Headlines didn't mention my name at first. Just "elderly veteran" and "hero dog defies orders." But within hours, my inbox filled with messages. Former Marines. Strangers. Even schoolteachers showing their students the video. One message stood out. It was from a young officer, not one of the two from that day, who wrote, "Sergeant Gaines, I want to be a better cop than I was yesterday. Thank you for reminding me what integrity looks like in real time." I sat back, letting the words settle over me like a warm blanket. We live in complicated times. But sometimes, clarity shows up in the unlikeliest form, like a K-9 dog refusing to follow a bad command, or a bystander who dares to film, or a colonel who just happened to be jogging in the right park at the right time. And sometimes, it's just an old vet refusing to sit quietly when dignity is on the line. I took a long sip from the thermos, let the warmth fill my chest, and nodded to the empty air. Semper Fi. 2 weeks later, I was invited to City Hall. I thought it was going to be a quiet meeting with a few officials, maybe a handshake and some bureaucratic language. Instead, when I walked in, wearing my uniform jacket for the first time in years, I was met with a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Local news outlets were there. On the dais stood Colonel Westbrook, the mayor, and the chief of police. The same chief who, just days before, had been grilled by community leaders over what they were calling the K-9 incident. The mayor stepped forward first. "Master Sergeant Gaines," he said, "on behalf of this city, we offer our sincerest apology for the treatment you received. You showed restraint, dignity, and leadership under pressure. And we're not just here to say sorry. We're here to change. Next, the police chief spoke. He looked uncomfortable, not guilty, but humbled. We've opened a review into the deployment of force protocols. Effective immediately, all K-9 officers will undergo enhanced scenario-based training, with specific modules on handling elderly civilians and veterans. Furthermore, both officers involved have been placed on administrative reassignment pending final review. Then came the real surprise. Colonel Westbrook stepped to the mic. I've been authorized to make this announcement on behalf of the Army's Public Liaison Division. Sergeant Gaines, we are formally nominating you for the Presidential Citizens Medal for your lifelong service to this country, and for your actions on that day. The room erupted. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. Sometimes the fight doesn't end when the battlefield quiets. Sometimes it continues at home, in parks, in policies, and in public eyes. And this time, the right people were watching. A few days after the City Hall ceremony, I got a call I wasn't expecting. Sergeant Gaines, the voice said. This is Officer Delgado. I was one of the two that day, with the dog. There was a pause. I could hear the weight in his voice, like he'd been rehearsing this call for hours. I owe you an apology. Not just because of what happened, but because I didn't think. I saw a report, followed an assumption, and ignored everything else. I forgot to ask myself who I was actually dealing with, and that's on me. I let him speak. He didn't beg for forgiveness, he didn't make excuses. Just owned it. That mattered. You were calm, even when we weren't, he continued. After the department review, I requested to be transferred to the Veteran Outreach Unit. I want to fix what I broke. I told him something my old CO used to say, you don't get to choose the moment you fail, only the one you stand back up. Then I added, make sure that next time you see someone like me, you see a citizen first. Not a suspect. We ended the call with something rare in moments like that, mutual respect. 2 days later, something else happened that shook me. I was walking through the park again, this time without the cane. My steps were slow, but steadier than usual. And from the other side of the field came a bark, low, familiar. Kaiser. He was off duty, walking with Colonel Westbrook. When he saw me, he trotted over without hesitation, tail wagging. He sat right at my feet again, just like before. Colonel Westbrook smiled from a distance. I think he remembers, she said. I knelt down slowly and patted his head. So do I whispered. The morning after my run-in with Kaiser, I found a letter tucked into my mailbox. No return address, but the envelope was crisp, official-looking, the kind that carried weight before you even opened it. Inside was a single sheet. Department of Defense Office of the Secretary, Washington, D.C. Dear Master Sergeant Harold Gaines, it has come to our attention, both through direct reports and public documentation, that you recently demonstrated exceptional restraint, honor, and leadership during a volatile incident involving local law enforcement. The nature of your response under duress serves as a shining example of what it means to uphold the values of this nation. In a time where division often rules the headlines, you reminded us all of what quiet strength and moral clarity look like. Your service never ended. It simply changed form. In recognition of your decades of sacrifice and your continued embodiment of civic responsibility, you are hereby invited to Washington, D.C., to be honored in a private ceremony hosted by senior defense officials, alongside other distinguished citizens. A formal agenda will follow. With deep respect, James A. Wainwright, Deputy Secretary of Defense. I sat back in my chair, hands trembling slightly as I placed the letter on the table. Not from pride. From gravity. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about being seen, not as a threat, not as a misjudged figure in a cap, but as what I had always been, a servant to something bigger than myself. I folded the letter carefully, like a flag. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle in my chest. Not just peace. But purpose. Part 9, next. Part 9 ChatGPT, Part 9, the ceremony. The plane touched down at Andrews Air Force Base on a quiet Tuesday morning. An aide met me at the gate, saluted, and escorted me directly to a waiting black SUV. No waiting room. No press. Just dignity. They put me up in a quiet suite near the Capitol. No fanfare. Just a fresh uniform laid out on the bed, pressed, tailored, with my ribbons and insignia placed just right. Whoever packed it knew everything down to the last detail, including the Bronze Star. The next morning, I stood before the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. It wasn't a public ceremony. No stage. No flashing bulbs. Just a semicircle of senior officers, a few veterans I didn't recognize, and a man in a dark gray suit with a lapel pin shaped like a folded flag. Deputy Secretary Wainwright. He stepped forward with a folder in his hand. "Sergeant Gaines," he said, "we honor you today not just for your military service, but for your continued leadership in a moment that could have turned divisive. You didn't retaliate. You rose above. And the nation noticed." He handed me a framed certificate. It wasn't flashy, but it meant more than medals. Then someone else stepped forward, a young cadet, maybe early 20s, with bright eyes and a steady salute. "Sir," he said, "your story was shared during our ethics course at the academy. You changed how I see the world. And how I plan to wear this uniform." I couldn't speak. I just placed my hand on his shoulder and nodded. Because in that moment, I realized something: this hadn't been about me. It had been about them. The ones coming next. The ones watching. The ones choosing who they'll become when no one tells them what to do. Part 10, Final. Part 10 Final ChatGPT, Part 10, Final, Legacy. When I got back home, it wasn't the applause or the letters I thought about. It was the bench. The same wooden bench in Roosevelt Park where it all began, old, cracked, and worn from years of quiet observation. That's where I sat again, the following Sunday morning, coffee in hand and sun warming my shoulders. But something was different. Where there used to be silence, now people nodded as they passed. A father pointed me out to his son. A jogger slowed just to say thank you. And near the bench, a small bronze plaque had been embedded in the concrete. I hadn't seen it before. I leaned forward and read it, "In honor of Master Sergeant Harold Gaines. A soldier, a leader, a reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just sits quietly, and does the right thing." I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there, watching the breeze move through the trees and listening to the world pass by with a little more grace than before. Because I knew something now, even when the uniform comes off. Even when the medals tarnish and the memory of wars fade. Dignity lives on in what we choose to do next. And sometimes, all it takes to change the course of a city, is a quiet old man on a bench and a dog that refused to follow the wrong order.